Well, welcome back to our read through the Bible, and today we're picking up in Joshua chapter 18. Remember, we are in the conquest stage, and today we'll finish Joshua, so we will be at the end of the conquest stage, the Lord willing. Now, as you come into Joshua chapter 18, verse 1 talks about the fact they're setting up the camp in a different location. They're moving from Gilgal to Shiloh, about 15 miles from Gilgal, 20 miles north of Jerusalem. They set up the tabernacle here at Shiloh, and this will be a very important center of worship through the entire period of the Judges up until the time of Samuel. Now, verses 2 and following of chapter 18, you remember that Judah, the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh have gotten their land. Reuben, Gad, the half-tribe Manasseh already have their land on the east side of the Jordan River. So 7 remain to get their land. So something interesting happens with these 7 tribes. Joshua sends 3 men from each of these 7 tribes, from Benjamin, Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan, to go throughout the entire land, the remainder of the land that's not already given to Judah, Ephraim, Manasseh, and of course the land on the east side of the Jordan River to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So he sends them out as scouts to take a survey of the land, write it in a book, bring it back, and will cast lots and determine the land that each tribe will receive. So in verses 11 and following, they cast lots for the first tribe, and the first tribe is Benjamin. Benjamin is fascinating because Benjamin, again, I think I said this in the last session, the division between Benjamin and Judah, they border each other, goes right through Jerusalem. In fact, I think some of the ancient priests describe the fact that a part of the temple area is in Benjamin, a part of it is in Judah. Well, I can't get that precise with you, but the border goes right through there. And so Jerusalem almost kind of is almost divided by these 2 tribes. Now, the reality is that Jerusalem is under control of a Canaanite tribe called the Jebusites. And they won't actually take Jerusalem until the time of David. And of course, Jerusalem will eventually become the capital of Israel, which even in the restoration of Israel in 1948, what is the capital of Israel? Jerusalem, recognized by President Trump as the capital of Jerusalem, which should have been recognized a long time ago. Anyway, when you come into chapter 19, the rest of the tribes get their division. The second lot falls to Simeon. Simeon has an area, it's kind of an interesting area because if you look on a map, Simeon is surrounded by Judah, and that's right. It kind of has this area in southern Judah. The big city, the most important city, the prominent city in Simeon will be Beersheba. And the third lot falls on Zebulun, and then the 4th lot falls on Issachar, and then the 5th lot falls on Asher. Asher has the area along the northern part of the Mediterranean coast in Israel. The 6th lot falls on Naphtali. Naphtali is the area around the Sea of Galilee, and the 7th lot falls on Dan. Now, Dan's inheritance is interesting because Dan receives the area kind of down around in southwestern Israel, there on the coast, and it's an area that is inhabited by the Philistines, and they have trouble taking their land. So interestingly enough, Dan will wind up relocating on their own north to a city called Leshem. They'll take that city and they will move their tribal inheritance there. So if you ever see a map, you might see one that will show Dan down in the southwest corner of the Philistine area. You might also see Dan or kind of a little location in the north. That's because Dan will wind up moving north. So as you come to the end of chapter 19, Joshua has finished apportioning the land, and he receives his land, a place called Timnath-Sereth in the hill country of Ephraim. And so all of this is divided, and the casting of the lots took place at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Remember, the tabernacle is set up in Shiloh. Very, very important. So as you come into chapter 20, it describes 6 cities of refuge. Remember, we talked about these already, but these cities are very important. These cities are cities that if a manslayer, someone unintentionally kills someone, they can go to these cities to keep from being killed. They will go to the elders of the city. The elders will determine, if it was really murder or if it was a manslayer, kind of a person that unintentionally killed someone. If it was a murderer, there is no refuge for a murderer, okay? And the avenger of blood, usually a relative, could kill that person. Now, if it was determined that the person is innocent of murder, but it was an accidental death, I've used the example of like you're in a forest and you're cutting down trees, an axe handle comes off and it strikes your neighbor in the head and the neighbor dies. You didn't mean to kill that person. That's not murder. That is guilty of manslaughter. So you would be in that city guarded until the death of the high priest. Then you could go back. And the 6 cities of refuge on the east side of the Jordan River are Golan, Ramoth Gilead, and Bezer. And on the west side of the Jordan River are Kadesh, Shechem, and in the south, Hebron. And then chapter 21 describes the 48 Levitical cities. Remember, the tribe of Levi is a very, very interesting tribe. They came to Moses' aid in the wilderness after the incident with the golden calves, and they go through and they destroy many of those that are unfaithful to the Lord, and so their inheritance becomes the Lord. The tribe of Levi, they will assist the priest, and they actually have the same descendants going back to Levi. And you have the 3 divisions here, the Kohathites, the Merarites, and the Gershonites. Well, they are given 48 Levitical cities in the land. They're kind of divided all over the land, and so they're to teach the truth about God. Some of these will actually later on become corrupted. You'll see this in the book of Judges, and I know Brother Mike's going to take us through the book of Judges next week, but you're going to see the disaster in the book of Judges with a few of the Levites there. Well, at Joshua 22, remember the 2.5 tribes that had come into the land of Canaan and had their inheritance on the east side. Remember, what are they? Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe Manasseh. And remember what Moses had told them from the beginning. They said, hey, this is a good area for us to graze. Well, Moses was a little kind of concerned that, hey, if I let you stay here, you will not go with your brothers into the land. So they kind of came up with this agreement, and what they decided was that the men of these 2.5 tribes would lead the way. They would act as the shock troops, the kind of the first ones in. They're leading the attack in the very, very, very beginning. And so they had been faithful. They had not, as the 10 spies had done from Kadesh Barnea, come back and said, hey, we can't go into the land, but they had been faithful, and now these 2.5 tribes are going back. And they're given a lot of spoil. Now, as they go back, something interesting happens. As they approach the Jordan River, they build an altar. Well, the rest of Israel hears about this, and they are very, very, very upset. Why are they upset? They're upset because, remember, they're to worship the Lord their God at one spot, the tabernacle, and later when they take Jerusalem, God will establish his name in Jerusalem. The temple will be placed there, and worried about idolatry, which is going to come in. And so when the 2.5 tribes built this altar there in the land of Canaan on the west side of the Jordan River, then they go back to Gilead, to the land east. Well, Phinehas, 10 of the tribal leaders, go and confront them in Gilead and said, what have you done? You built this altar. You're going to sacrifice burnt offerings in opposition to God. You're going to lead our people astray. And it's interesting that the people of the east, Reuben, Gad, and half-tribe Manasseh, say, no. This altar is a witness to our children. There may come a time in the future when they say, hey, we don't need to go back and worship. What do we have to do with the Israelites and the tabernacle and later on the temple? So at any rate, he describes here that this altar was not a place of burnt offerings and sacrifices and grain offerings, but it was a witness. And Phinehas, remember Phinehas, the zeal of Phinehas, how he dealt with the situation at the Baal of Moab, the Baal of Peor, how he dealt with that situation. Well, Phinehas is satisfied, and they go back, and they're not talking of war anymore because they were going to have a war. They were not going to allow part of their brothers to turn their back on God. This was very, very, very important to stay close to God. Then in chapters 23 and 24, you have the 2 final addresses by Joshua. These are very, very important. In chapter 23, he calls all of Israel together and gives the first of his 2 speeches. Now, all the land was conquered in about 7 years between 1405 and 1398. And so it's now 110, or Joshua died at the age of 110, about 1383. And what he is saying is this: remember the Lord your God. Now, in chapter 23, 13 times in the 16th verse of this chapter, he will use the phrase, the Lord your God. Remember how Moses spoke so much of the Lord your God speaking to Israel? Joshua listened very well. Drive out the people, possess the land, be firm, listen to the law. And very important, do not disobey what God says. And what he says here is, do not associate with the Canaanites. Don't even mention their gods. Cling to the Lord your God. I'm about to die. But he says this: when you go and serve other gods, the anger of the Lord will burn against you, and you will perish from this land. Sad prophecy, because this is exactly what happened, and this is the reason for the Babylonian and Assyrian, the Babylonian captivity and the destruction of the north by the Assyrians later on, because they did not obey the Lord their God. Well, 24 is Joshua's last address to the nation. Now, it's interesting because they changed locations here. The former address had been at Shiloh, but now this address is at Shechem. And it's interesting to note, Shechem is located in a very strategic location, geographically, militarily, but also spiritually, because just to the north of Shechem is a mountain called Ebal. Just to the south of Shechem is a mountain called Mount Gerizim. Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal. Does that ring a bell? Because if you go back into the Pentateuch, it talks about the fact that these places would be the Mount of Blessing, the Mount of Cursing. In fact, there was an altar that was built on Mount Ebal, which was the Mount of Cursing, and they wrote an entire copy of the law. They built an altar, they coated it with lime, white plaster, and they wrote the entire law. I guess that means the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So they wrote the entire law up there. And this is where he gathers them to Shechem, the city right in the little valley between these two hills. And the leaders are singled out. He reviews Israel's history, how God called Abraham, Terah, his father, was an idolater, how Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob came as the patriarchs, how he brought them out of Egypt after the 430 years there, including the time of the wilderness wandering, how brought them into the land of the Amorites, defeated the kings, beginning with Sihon and Og, and how Balaam was even killed. Remember the one that Balak had gotten? And he goes through all this history. And he said, I led you against the Amorite, the Prezurite, the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Girgashite, the Jebusite. I gave you houses you did not build. Remember, they took over this land. They took the houses. I gave you houses you did not build, vineyards you did not plant. And he said, who are you going to serve? And you have this very famous passage from the book of Joshua, chapter 24. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And all the people said, we will serve God. But Joshua fires back, you will not be able to serve him, for he is holy. And the people said, no, but we will serve God. So Joshua makes a covenant. Now, it's interesting. He makes a covenant with them and wrote the book of the law. Took a copy of the book of the law and wrote it in. I guess he added this to the original first 5 books of the Bible. He took a stone and set it up by the sanctuary. Now, it's interesting that the sanctuary, the tabernacle, is still at Shiloh. So what does he mean by sanctuary? I think there's 2 things here. The first altar that Abraham built, actually before his name's changed, Abram built, was at Shechem, okay? And then you have this altar sitting on Mount Ebal. Remember, the Mount of Blessing, the Mount of Cursing. So in this place, he takes this copy of the law, sets it up, and reminds the people, that altar on Mount Ebal, all the law of God, the altar that Abram built here in Shechem, how holy God was. And Joshua departs from the scene, giving them this instruction: remember God's word. And people, this is why God has laid on our hearts the importance of reading God's word. Read the Bible. God bless and have a great day.